The 6th of June 1944, D-Day. Operation Overlord, the Allies' code name for the invasion of Normandy, begins. It was years in the planning and saw all sorts of innovations developed to enable tens of thousands of men and machines make it across the Channel. Well, look at the technology that developed, allowing the Allies not just success in Normandy, but victory in the entire war. So here's a question for you. How did London buses and sand ensure that the Allies were successful on D-Day? The answer involves this, the X-Craft midget submarine. 20 were built during 1943 and 44. 51 feet long, just 5.5 feet diameter. It's January 1944, and one of these X-Craft is dispatched to Normandy. Under the cover of the long winter darkness, they surface and 2 crew members get out. They swim to shore. When they get there, they take sand samples. Why? Well, quite simply, so they can take it back to England and have the scientists assess whether it's firm enough to be used by tanks. This is what the divers would have worn to get to the beaches to collect that sand. One of the first ever dry suits. This is where the London bus park comes into it. This is a 42 horsepower Gardner diesel engine as used on contemporary London buses. Fair enough on a bus, but imagine it being, obviously with this gap closed, here, right in your working space, only feet away. Noise, the smell of it, the heat of it, would have been horrible. It's a very special feeling and a strange feeling being inside this X-Craft. Special because you realise what they achieved in these during the Second World War, but also at the same time you realise just how small it is. People with claustrophobia don't even think about it. This woodland and scores of others like it along the south coast would have been absolutely crammed with tents. Tens of thousands of troops here biding their time for the invasion. A canopy of the forest providing them with cover from any German reconnaissance planes.
It was nice weather then. We were on the canvas. We knew it was coming. We knew we were destined to go because we were isolated from the rest of the world. You could only communicate with the rest of the world by phone or by letter. Phone was cut off. Letters had to go through the officers to censor. We were given forms saying where our position was. We were going to land on a beach called Jig, which was part of Gold Beach. But otherwise it was just a nice summer's day and we just sat around.
So the troops were safe under canvas, but it was a difficult time for the people of the south coast. A 10-mile exclusion zone was put in place from the sea back, all the way from Land's End to the Wash. So if you lived somewhere like Wickham here, you couldn't leave. And if you wanted to come to the area, you simply couldn't. This is the old West Meon railway station on the disused Meon Valley Railway between Alton and Fareham in Hampshire. Now part of it's a cycle track and I'm on my way to Dford, a place with a very special connection to D-Day. This has become known as Dford's secret siding. It played a small but unique part in the story of D-Day. It was here that on the 2nd of June, 2 carriages were brought along and used by Prime Minister Winston Churchill to have important discussions with people like General Eisenhower. And Churchill actually spent the night before D-Day here in a railway carriage in Dford. This is the beach at Hayling Island, and this beach, along with others at places like Littlehampton further up the coast, Bracklesham Bay, have their own part to play in the D-Day story, an important part at that. The Allies used these beaches as their final test before they went to Normandy. You can see why. Huge expanse of shingle and surf, great location to test the skills and drills of getting mass numbers of men and equipment ashore. The River Hamble in Hampshire, now a haven for wildlife and sailors. But in June 1944, like many rivers and harbours the length of the south coast, it was crammed with landing craft and ships of all description. The whole area would have been a hive of activity with different units embarking. This, though, is Warsash and a place called the Rising Sun Jetty. And here, on the 5th of June 1944, 3,000 commandos came down the road and got on their landing craft. Leading them was Brigadier Lord Lovat. They had the job of landing and quickly making their way to Pegasus Bridge, which had been captured by glider teams earlier that night. The plan worked. The commandos made it to Pegasus Bridge, and upon meeting the airborne defenders, Lord Lovat famously apologised for being 2.5 minutes late. Or did he? Historians now disagree on the lateness of the commandos. Some say they were over an hour late. But whatever the truth, the bridge was relieved. Famous images of troops coming ashore on D-Day. But how do they get tanks and heavy armour, and lots of it, across to Normandy? The answer is this, the landing craft tank, 800 of which were built for the Normandy landings. Ten tanks could be fitted on each landing craft tank, 2 alongside each other, all the way to the front. It would have been really tight here with all the tanks on board, and for that reason, the crews stayed with their tanks for the entire trip across the English Channel, be it a Sherman like this one, or indeed a Churchill tank. The landing craft tank is over 170 feet long, but its sheer size doesn't change the basic parameters and idea of a landing craft. It's flat bottom so it can get into the beach, but that means it pitches and rolls and wallows. Seasickness was pretty much inevitable. After the rigours of the journey, the Normandy beaches awaited. The ramp would go down, the tanks would come out and face whatever the Germans could throw at them. This is the only landing craft tank left in the world. It stands as a monument to all those who made the journey to France. It also gives us the merest hint of what it would have been like. The Normandy landings were a vital first step in freeing Europe. But then what? How do you keep the momentum up and push into Germany? Well, the answer is you need to keep the supplies coming through in vast quantities. But how, when many of the harbours of France would have been destroyed? The answer was simple, but practically very difficult. Build your own harbours. And that's just what they did. Collapsible, prefabricated harbours, codenamed Mulberry. 2 harbours were set up in France and landed 2.5 million men, 500,000 vehicles and 4 million tonnes of supplies in 10 months after D-Day. We're at Langston Harbour next to Hayling Island in Hampshire to see a remnant of this amazing feat. These are known as the Phoenix breakwaters. They came in 6 sizes up to 6,000 tonnes and were built by contractors right around the UK. They were then brought south and sunk at Pagham and at Dungeness, keeping them safe from prying eyes. Resurrection then came. They were raised, hence the name Phoenix, and taken by 2 tugs over to Normandy. Sadly, this example didn't ever make it out of Langston Harbour. It's amazing getting this close. You really do see how it was a ready-made harbour, even down to the metal bollards built in. This is Shanklin Chine on the southern coast of the Isle of Wight, a beautiful gorge running down towards the sea, and apparently the island's oldest tourist attraction. But why am I here? What's it got to do with the Normandy landings of 1944? This pipe is what's known as Pluto, and there's about 60 yards of it here at the Chine. Pluto stands for Pipeline Under the Ocean, and historians say this is one of the most significant technological achievements of the entire Second World War. Here's why. This amazing archive footage shows the Pluto pipeline being laid at sea. There are in fact several pipelines, but all use this same technique. Steel pipe wound onto a 40 by 60 foot floating drum called the conundrum, and unwound as it crossed the channel, the pipe sinking to the bottom. The pipe itself was 2 inches in diameter. The flexible steel covered by successive layers of tar, galvanised steel wires and resin impregnated paper. This is the pumping station for the line from Sandown on the Isle of Wight. And as you can see, not all that much has changed. Pluto delivered 180 million gallons of fuel to the Allies, but it was a fairly short-lived affair, and by the end of August 1944, its job was done and the pipeline stopped sending oil. Nonetheless, it had delivered 8% of the fuel used by the Allies during that period. Thanks for watching. For more from Forces News, like and subscribe to our channel.